She wore the name Bluebird, but to the white world she was simply Clara. Clara Kestrel, a name as crisp and final as the starched white collar of the dress she wore. At 22, she was an anomaly, a Navajo woman living on the eastern fringe of Boston, attending the New England School of Law. 5 years had passed since that devil's bargain in Flagstaff, and 5 years since Clara had been sent away. Her father, a simple, weathered man named Hustian Pa, had used his last few silver dollars, earned shearing sheep for a passing trader, to secure her place at the boarding school. He didn't want a white woman for a daughter. He wanted a white language warrior. Clara sat in the vast, echoing library of the law school, the scent of aged paper and leather a sharp contrast to the familiar, clean smell of desert dust she still carried in her memory. She was studying real property law, deeds and titles, a subject as dry as the Arizona scrub, yet one that held the terrifying key to her family's fate. The letter was crumpled in her skirt pocket, its message a stark block of English that made the intricate legal texts on her table seem meaningless. Eviction notices served on the families of the Chinle Valley, land-ruled legal property of the Arizona Land and Mineral Company. Squatters must vacate within 30 days. No recourse. It was the outcome her father had feared, the reason she had spent 5 years translating abstract legal concepts into the concrete reality of her people's survival. Her clan's ancestral land, the very canyons where she had herded goats as a girl, had been stolen through a trick of paper. A gentle cough brought her back from the sun-drenched canyons to the granite realities of Boston. Professor Alistair Finch, a man whose skepticism was legendary, stood over her. "Ms. Kestrel," he said, his voice a low, formal drone, "are you prepared for the mock trial tomorrow? Your argument, as I recall, hinges on the concept of adverse possession, a doctrine entirely dependent on clear, long-standing documentation of intent. Against a federally recognized homestead claim, you are arguing with a stick against a cannon." Clara closed her textbook, placing her hand on the worn leather cover. "Professor, in the territory, land is not always proven by paper. My argument is not only one of adverse possession, but of fraudulent inducement. The individuals who signed that Homestead Act filing did not consent to sell their homes. They were illiterate in English and were told they were signing a petition for vital supplies." Finch adjusted his necktie, a gesture of intellectual disapproval. "Proof, Ms. Kestrel. In American law, intent is everything, and proof of systemic deceit is almost impossible. You would need a confession or an eyewitness to 100 separate acts of fraud. And who would your witnesses be? The very people whose legal competency is already in question." He was right. Her people's testimony would be dismissed as biased or unreliable against the word of a government agent and a respected judge like Harlan Vane, who was now a powerful figure in the territory. But Clara had an advantage they hadn't counted on. "Professor," she said, her voice steady, an echo of the firm desert wind, "they signed with a mark, an X, a thumbprint in some cases, but a real signature, as you know, is not just ink on paper. It is an act of identity. I speak their language. I know their customs." She leaned forward, her eyes catching the lamplight. When my people sign an official document, they often use a personal, stylized mark, a symbol known only to the clan, that represents their DNA name, like a miniature personal brand. The thumbprint may be real, but the intention is a lie. I will prove they were signing for blankets, not for the sale of their ancient burial grounds. I will prove it with a hidden language no white man bothered to study. Finch paused, a flicker of something new, not skepticism, but genuine curiosity in his eyes. The white world had dismissed the Navajo as simple and undocumented. They hadn't considered the possibility of a meticulous, non-Latin legal record embedded in their very identity. A hidden language of identity, he murmured, a fascinating, if audacious theory. But you are fighting the power of the Arizona Land and Mineral Company, Ms. Kestrel. Do you know who owns that company? Clara knew who owned that company. The Arizona Land and Mineral Company was a shell corporation secretly financed by Judge Harlan Vane's East Coast Syndicate, the very people whose money she was now using to pay for her education. She was being educated by the enemy to destroy the enemy. I know who I am fighting, Professor, Clara said, the name Bluebird singing in her soul. And I know I have to win, because if I fail, my entire history will be wiped out by a single, fraudulent X. As the old clock in the library tower chimed midnight, Clara packed her bag. She didn't need the mock trial tomorrow. She needed a train ticket west. Her 5-year preparation was over. The legal battle for the Painted Desert was about to begin, pitting ancient identity against modern greed, with Clara Kestrel, the unexpected warrior of paper and ink, standing alone on the precipice of a national scandal. Her journey from the lecture halls of Boston to the dusty, treacherous courtrooms of the Arizona Territory was her only path home.
The journey west was a jarring reversal. For 5 years, Clara Kestrel had systematically erased the dust of the Navajo Nation from her life, replacing it with the granite discipline of New England law. Now, the train wheels clacked out a relentless rhythm that seemed to mock her carefully constructed facade. Each mile west peeled away a layer of the woman she had become, revealing the girl, Bluebird, who was terrified and fiercely determined beneath. She disembarked in Holbrook, Arizona Territory, a town that seemed stitched together with grit and desperation. The train station was less a grand terminal and more a shack leaning into the fierce desert wind. The air here was thin, sharp with the smell of alkali dust and sagebrush, a scent that punched her with the memory of home. She was met not by her father, Hastian Cha, but by her younger cousin, Dinetzo, translated tall man, who worked as a wagon driver for a small trading post. Dinetzo wore faded denim overalls and a wide brim hat, but his eyes, when he saw her, held the ancient, cautious gaze of their people. "Clara," he greeted, his voice low, using her white name. He barely glanced at her stiff Eastern-tailored travel suit, her polished leather satchel, the tools of her war. "Welcome back to the dry side of the world." "Dinetzo, where is my father?" His gaze shifted to the empty horizon. "He is in the canyon, waiting. We do not talk about the papers here, out in the open. The territory has ears." Clara felt a sickening lurch. The Arizona Land and Mineral Company, financed by Judge Vane, wasn't just a name on a legal brief. It was a physical force, capable of controlling men and information in these remote territories. The ride out was long, bumpy, and silent. Dinetzo's wagon cut across the Mesa Redonda, the flat-topped mountains looming like stern judges in the distance. The land itself was the first witness Clara had to interview. She noticed the changes immediately. "The sheep are grazing farther from the water this year," she observed, pointing to a scattered flock. Dinetzo tightened his grip on the reins. "The company's hired hands, the sheriff's men, really, they have cut the access to the lower creek. They say the water is now company property, part of the claim. Many families have moved farther back, close to the canyon mouth. And the paperwork, the notices, they are stapled to the trading post wall in English." He spat the last word like a stone. "They are signs of the wind trying to blow us away. We have no wind block, Clara. We only have you."
Clara finally found her father, Hastine Cha, in their family's traditional summer hogan, a circular, traditional dwelling deep within the Chinle Valley. He was sitting by a meager fire, his face lined like a dry riverbed, weaving a ceremonial rug. He did not look up when she entered. "My daughter has become a white woman," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "The school has taught you to wear their clothes and walk their walk." "The school taught me to fight their fight, father," Clara replied, dropping her satchel onto the dirt floor. The heavy legal texts within seemed utterly useless in this ancient space. "Where are the papers?" Hastine Cha slowly unwound a strand of dyed wool. "They are gone. The white men came with the sheriff. They took the sheep, they took the grain, and they took the single sheet of paper they had tricked us into marking. They said it was evidence of the proper transaction." Clara felt a knot of dread tighten in her chest. Without the original document bearing the fraudulent X marks, her entire legal case collapsed. She would have to rely on testimony alone, pitting the word of unrepresented, disenfranchised Navajo elders against a powerful judge and a railroad syndicate. "Father," she insisted, speaking now in flawless Diné Bizad, the Navajo language, "the men who came, the ones who made you press your thumb, what did they tell you, exactly?" Hastine Cha pointed to the silver bracelet on his wrist, a family heirloom. "They saw this," he said. "They said, 'Sign here, old man. We will tell Washington you need more silver for your family. A great petition for blankets and food.' I signed for the blankets, Clara, not for the ground where my ancestors rest." Clara pulled out a pen and her legal notepad. She needed to capture every detail. "The signatures. Tell me about the marks you made and the marks of the others. Do you remember the symbols?" "A man remembers his name, even when he can only write X," her father said, finally looking at her. "For 5 years I was told you were learning their powerful language. Now tell me, daughter, is your power stronger than their greed?" The next 3 weeks were a frantic, dangerous education in human nature and law. Clara transformed from a theoretical law student into a practical detective. She traveled the vast, empty expanse of the disputed land, riding Denoso's wagon, visiting the scattered hogans near the reservation border. The families were wary. They had already been betrayed once by white men promising goods for a simple mark. Why trust this woman who wore the clothes of the very people who were now driving them out? Clara used her fluency in Diné Bizad, the language she had once tried to forget, to win their trust. She didn't talk about adverse possession or fraudulent inducement. She spoke of ke, kinship, and hojo, balance and harmony. She explained that the white man's law was a maze, and she was the only one with the map. Her mission was simple yet crucial, to document the true personal hojo symbols of the signatories. She met an elderly woman named Azatlizi, woman of the goats, whose grandson was sickly. "They promised me salt for the winter," the old woman whispered, her eyes wide with lingering fear. "I made my mark." "Show me your mark," Clara requested, sliding a clean sheet of paper to her. Azatlizi, who had never learned to read English, carefully drew a precise, tiny spiral, the symbol for the coiled horns of a goat, her clan totem. Clara recorded it, writing her own formal affidavit in English beside it. Signed by Azatlizi, whose personal mark represents her intention to receive salt, not to convey fee simple title to her ancestral land. She moved on to a war veteran known as Beshligai, Silverknife, who had lost 2 fingers at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, yet had managed to sign the fraudulent papers with a shaky X. He showed Clara his mark, a distinct, asymmetrical arrow pointing east, representing his warrior's journey. By the end of the weeks, Clara had compiled 100 personal signatures, each one a small, intricate drawing, a geometric pattern, an animal silhouette, a stylized lightning bolt that was demonstrably different from the simple, uniform X placed on the homestead claim. This was the silent language her professor had dismissed, a legal counter-record of identity and consent. Clara took the evidence, a thick ledger filled with the beautiful, complex symbols of her people, to Phoenix, the territory's sprawling, ambitious capital. This was the heart of the legal world, a place of power and dust-choked compromise. She knew she couldn't fight Judge Vane alone. She needed a white advocate, someone inside the system who was untainted by the current corruption. She found him on the 3rd floor of the territorial courthouse, Ezra Blackwell, a middle-aged lawyer known for his crushing debt, heavy drinking, and surprisingly almost fanatic devotion to the truth of precedent, the idea that the law must apply equally to all, no matter their station. Blackwell's office smelled of stale whiskey and old leather. He looked at Clara, then at the ledger she placed on his desk, and snorted. A Navajo woman arguing for a new interpretation of consent based on picture writing against Harlan Vane? Miss Kestrel, you're either the bravest fool I've ever met, or you don't understand that Vane is the law in this territory. Clara remained standing, her New England discipline holding firm against his cynicism. I understand that Mr. Vane's client, the Arizona Land and Mineral Company, is built on a lie. This ledger contains 100 separate sworn testimonies of fraudulent inducement. Each one of these drawings is the Navajo word for no, I did not sell my home. Blackwell picked up the ledger, his fingers tracing the intricate lines of a water bug symbol. And you believe a territorial judge, Vane's appointed crony, will accept a drawing of a water bug as legal proof of non-consent over a notarized, federally filed Homestead Act claim? He has to, Clara stated simply, because my argument is not that the Navajo are smarter than the law. My argument is that the law is blind. It cannot see these intricate truths. I am here to open its eyes. You are the only lawyer who has not taken the company's money, Mr. Blackwell. You need a case, and I have a fight. I will pay you with the only thing I have, a share of the land we win back. Ezra Blackwell looked from the ledger to the eviction notice, a document that was driving hundreds of people from their homes back to Clara's unwavering gaze. He saw not a defeated girl, but a sharp mind wielding a formidable, entirely unexpected legal weapon. 50,000 words of paperwork, Miss Kestrel, and you want to tear it down with 100 lines of forgotten ink? All right, I'm in. Let's see if we can teach the territory's judges how to read a truth they never wanted to know. The stage was set. The unlikely partnership between the cynical, burnt-out white lawyer and the determined bilingual Navajo law student was formed. They were now pitted against the full might of Judge Harlan Vane's financial and legal empire. The trial that would either uphold a massive land theft or redefine Native American legal rights in the West was only weeks away.
Judge Harlan Vane was not merely a corrupt official. He was a man who believed absolutely in his own righteousness. In his spacious Phoenix manor, cooled by a revolutionary water misting system, he received Mr. Tobias Finch, the senior counsel for the Arizona Land and Mineral Company, a man whose reputation was as impeccably starched as his linen suit. "The eviction process has been slightly delayed, Judge," Finch reported, folding his gloves with clinical precision. "A petition was filed in the territorial court. A lawyer named Blackwell and a Navajo woman named Kestrel." Vane, who was tracing the borders of the disputed land on a detailed map with a sterling silver letter opener, paused. Kestrel? Where did she spring from? Harvard or some similar Eastern finishing school, Finch scoffed. A novelty, nothing more. But she has managed to secure a temporary injunction based on a vague claim of fraudulent inducement. Vane's eyes narrowed. He recalled the conversation 5 years prior with Saunders, confirming the risk of fraud claims. He had believed the illiteracy of the native population was his shield. "What is her evidence?" Vane demanded. "The official documents are filed, notarized, and sealed. They have been accepted by the Federal Land Office. 100 signatures, X's, on the line. What magic does she possess to reverse that?" "It's not magic, Your Honor. It's anthropology," Finch replied, consulting a note. "She claims the Navajo signatories possess personal, ritualistic marks, Hujjo symbols, which are their true identifiers. She alleges that by comparing these detailed marks, which she collected, to the simple X's on our document, she can prove they were induced to sign under the belief that the paper was a petition for blankets, not a land deed. She says the X's do not align with their genuine signature styles, indicating lack of informed consent." Vane laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "A beautiful absurdity. She wants to argue that a squiggly line is more legally binding than a federally recognized notary seal. This is a court of law, Finch, not a Navajo sweat lodge. However, we cannot let this triviality waste our time. The railroads are waiting. Use every procedural instrument available. File a motion to strike the evidence on the grounds of cultural irrelevance and hearsay. Discredit Blackwell and discredit this Kestrel woman personally. If she has an East Coast education, she must have debts. Find them." Vane's true fear was not that Clara would win, but that she would expose the process. The sheer scale of the land grab, the fraud of a communal homestead of 100 unrelated individuals, was the weak spot. He needed to crush the case before the federal authorities took notice. In the cramped Phoenix office, Ezra Blackwell stared at the motion to strike, a document dripping with legal malice. "They've gone for the throat, Clara." Blackwell slammed the motion down. "Vane's counsel argues your entire ledger, Your 100 Hajot symbols is inadmissible. They claim it's extra-legal evidence that holds no standing against a signed, sealed, and official deed. They're saying the only signature that matters is the one that meets the lowest legal bar, an X by a witness. Clara ran a hand over the smooth, worn cover of the leather ledger. This book was the heartbeat of her people's claim. They are trying to stop us from introducing the truth, Clara countered. If the court cannot see the intent of the signatory, then the legal system is merely a tool for robbery. Intent, yes, but we need legal precedent, Blackwell insisted, pacing the small office. We need a hook in the white man's law that says culture matters, that consent isn't just about a mark, but about understanding. This isn't just a case of simple fraud, Clara. It's a case of sophisticated legal manipulation of illiteracy. Clara had spent years in the Eastern libraries. She reached for the most obscure, dustiest volume on the shelf, Precedents in Contract Law, 1840 to 1870. The doctrine of unconscionability, she murmured, tracing a paragraph with her finger. It's rarely used, but it exists. A contract can be voided if the terms are so grossly unfair that no reasonable or informed person would agree to them, and if there was a marked inequality of bargaining power, a gross disparity in knowledge or legal sophistication at the time of signing. Blackwell stopped pacing. The argument shifted from cultural symbols to foundational contract ethics. Vane's people argue that the signatories received consideration, a few dollars, a sack of grain. We argue that the value received was so ridiculously low compared to the value of the land, the potential coal and railroad access, that it proves they could not have understood the terms of the exchange. No informed landowner would sell 12,800 acres for a mule and a bag of salt. That gross disparity in consideration proves the unconscionability and the fraudulent inducement. Clara's face hardened with determination. And the Hajot symbols? They become powerful corroborating evidence of that lack of comprehension. The fact that they used their personal Dene signature for a simple petition, not a uniform X for a grand legal transfer, proves they did not understand the gravity of the contract they were signing. Blackwell smiled, a rare, genuine expression that briefly erased years of cynicism. The law demands its pound of flesh, but it respects its own history, Clara. We argue the intent of a white law, contractual fairness, and use your people's culture to prove the violation. It's beautiful. Vane is about to learn that you didn't just learn English in Boston, you learned how to translate his own weapons. The Territorial Court of Phoenix was a cauldron of anxiety and heat. The courtroom was packed, not just with lawyers and curious locals, but with Navajo elders who had made the difficult journey from the distant canyons, their presence a silent, powerful challenge to the proceedings. Judge Vane, though not presiding, sat prominently in the gallery, his imposing figure a palpable threat. The company's lawyer, Finch, delivered his opening argument, painting the Navajo as shiftless squatters who had been justly compensated for abandoning unused federal land. Then came Clara's moment. Blackwell, his voice clear and unexpectedly sober, called Hastine Che-Ah to the stand. Mr. Che-Ah, Blackwell began, speaking slowly, Did you willingly sell your home, the land where you herd your sheep and where your family is buried, to the Arizona Land and Mineral Company? Hastin Shea answered in Dene Bazaa, translated by Clara herself, who stood beside him, maintaining a perfect, emotionless legal posture. I sold nothing. The man asked me to sign for blankets for the winter. He took my thumb, pressed it to the ink, and made the mark. And what value did you receive? A sack of grain and the promise of a mule. Blackwell produced a map showing the coal deposits underneath the disputed land, deposits estimated to be worth over $2 million at current market rates. The contrast between a sack of grain and $2 million was a physical shock in the silent courtroom. Now, Mr. Chia, Blackwell continued, if you look at this ledger, which your daughter has certified, and point to your personal mark, the one that represents your true signature, your hajou. Hastin Chea pointed to a perfectly rendered symbol, a small, intricate drawing of the four corners of a hogan under the sun, a symbol of rooted home and longevity. And if you look at the X on the original deed, Blackwell held up a magnified copy of the fraudulent document. Is this mark, this X, your true signature? It is the mark of a man who cannot read, Hastin Cha stated simply, looking directly at the judge. It is the sign of a fool, not the sign of my hajou. Clara knew this testimony alone was not enough. The defense would tear down the cultural value of the hajou symbols. They needed to tie the fraudulent signatures to the concealed intent of the company. The next day, Clara took the stand herself, not as a witness, but as an expert legal interpreter of cross-cultural consent. This was the pivot of the case. She argued that the hajou symbols proved the signatory's high level of internal sophistication regarding identity, and the simple X proved the external disparity of knowledge that made the contract unconscionable. The company's act was not merely misleading. It was a systematic abuse of the doctrine of
consideration. They didn't just pay too little, they paid so little that the transaction itself becomes proof of the Navajo people's total lack of understanding of the contract's actual nature. When the money offered is a pittance for a multi-million-dollar land asset, the law must assume the consent was obtained by fraud. Judge Henderson looked from Clara to the meticulous ledger, then to the smug face of Judge Vane in the gallery. Clara had successfully translated an ancient moral wrong into a precise, cold-blooded violation of American contract law. The case was no longer about picture writing versus paper. It was about justice versus unconscionable greed, using the very legal principles Vane had sworn to uphold. The courtroom held its breath, awaiting the judicial earthquake that was surely coming.